thank you for joining. Super excited to be at Google Chicago with Laurie Notaro today. I am Britton Picciolini, based here in the Chicago office for Google, and Laurie and I go way back.
Way back.
Laurie and I actually went to college together at Arizona State University, and we both worked at the student newspaper on the entertainment insert, the State Press magazine. So this is just more fun than I know to have you here. I've been trying to get you to Google Chicago for 10 years-ish through all of the books that you've written, and this finally is working out, so thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you
for being so persistent.
Oh,
I love being here.
I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled you're here. So we are here to talk about Laurie's new novel, Crossing the Horizon. So thrilled to talk about it. I'm going to have a little bio first.
Okay.
So we're going to do your official bio, and then we're going to have a fun bio.
Okay.
Okay? Okay. So this is the official bio. Laurie Notaro was a reporter and daily columnist at the Metro Daily, The Arizona Republic, before publishing 12 books of fiction and nonfiction with Random House and Simon & Schuster, several of which have been New York Times bestsellers. Her work covers the genres of humor, women's fiction, historical fiction, and literary fiction. She was a finalist for the Thurber Prize and has been awarded the Hearst Award, the Golden Circle Award, and several awards from the Society of Professional Journalists. Like, only a mother would love that, right? Or everybody
My
on the
mother
planet.
doesn't, but that's fine.
Yeah, whatever. Okay. So, like I said, Laurie and I go way back. And I did some Googling because we're at Google. And I found an older bio on one of her sites that was a hidden page. And I said, let's just unearth this, because this is the voice that I remember from Laurie from 20 plus years ago. 20 plus years ago. Yeah. So, but I'm asking Laurie to read it because when I read it, I hear it in her voice. So I'm going to ask.
I will give it a shot. Yeah,
she's losing her voice.
You didn't just Google it, you mined this, because this is so deep in the archives, it's crazy.
I did find
So
something.
my fun bio is, the first sign that I should have not entered the field of journalism introduced itself when I was caught with a fifth of rum in my purse the first night of high school journalism camp at the roller skating rink activity. My friend Doug, whose rum it actually was, got sent home. But I only got probation, a whole day of emergency counseling, and a wicked bad rep as the loosest, dirtiest, meanest girl in the whole camp. Within an hour, I was pregnant, a teen runaway, and had made a move on the camp director, who was a retirement-age man with a red, flaky skin condition and a possible glass eye. They even wrote a story about the scandalous rum in rink incident in the camp newspaper. I mean, it was journalism camp, which is barely, barely, barely 1/fraction of a millimeter on the cool scale above Flag Corps camp. Band kids were cooler than we were. Janitors were cooler than we were. Katie Cora could have easily qualified as the camp slut. Journalism camp left a bitter, almost Republican taste in my mouth, and that scared me. Thank you, Britton, for making me 17 again.
Absolutely. This is so much fun. So, not that you're not the fun Laurie that you were back in the day. It's just, when I remember reading Laurie Notaro, this is what I remember reading. And I'm currently reading this new wonderful side of historical fiction.
Glad.
Let's talk a little bit about Crossing the Horizon.
I love talking about the ladies, so yes, let's talk about them.
So set the scene for me a little bit, and I know we have a video, so you let me know when's best to bring this in.
Okay.
But I want to set the scene, right? We're talking 1927. What's the world like at this time?
The world is actually this amazing place in 1927 for women. We granted women the right to vote in 1920. In Britain, it was 1918. And what that afforded women was the ability to try to conquer and establish themselves in roles traditionally held gender-wise by men. So women were not only becoming pilots, they were becoming reporters, photographers, politicians. They were speaking out, and it was a really glorious time for women. It was the jazz age. Anything went. The excitement was humming. And so people, and women especially, felt that they could conquer anything, that all of the boundaries had kind of dropped, and they were free to go after their dreams. Then when Wall Street crashed, that window closes. So we have those short 9 years of women accomplishing great things and going on to becoming scientists and inventing things and doing crazy, wonderful, having really great adventures. And 1929, it's all over. And we don't regain that kind of pace as women until like the late 60s.
This just breaks my heart.
Yeah, it is. It does.
It absolutely breaks your heart. So the good news is that you've unearthed this slice of history that is so exciting. So first, tell me a little bit about how this even came to be, because I think that's a story unto itself.
It's a crazy story.
Yeah, so tell us how you even thought, hey, I'm going to write a book about some old pilot ladies.
I do now have interest in
Now you
aviation,
do,
but
yeah.
prior to that, I really didn't. And you knew me when I was also a reporter. We were trained
Yeah.
together
Right.
at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. So reporting was
Go
always
Devils.
back there in my history. It was always a love of mine.
Right.
But as my career progressed, I just became known as a humor writer, and that's what I ended up doing for 25 years.
Right.
So I was on the treadmill one day, watching TiVo, which is the most unreliable piece of technological equipment on the face of the earth. And the older Google gets, the more adamant it becomes that it's going to tape what it wants to tape and not what you want to see. So I believe that I was going to be watching The Real Housewives of New Jersey. And
one
instead,
does.
yes, I'm on the treadmill. Of
Right.
course, it's my junk TV. It's like eating Funyuns and working out at the same time. But instead came up this BBC show called Vanishings, and I thought, oh God, not only is it not Real Housewives, but it's going to be educational, and this is going to be a torturous
This is not what I
45
signed up
minutes.
for, yeah.
With my little Propel bottle of water. But I watched it, and in that show came this remarkable story of all of these women. They focused on three in particular who had made the transatlantic attempt prior to Amelia Earhart. And I got off the treadmill immediately, like I was looking for an excuse. And I went to the Google, which is true. I totally went to the Google to
Love the
see
Googs.
what was going on, and these stories were true. And I thought, how could this be? How could I have gone through all of the school and all of this college, and even our culture does not know of these women when this accomplishment was so great? Yeah. So after more further investigation, I found out there was not three, there were 5 other women, including Amelia Earhart, who made the transatlantic attempt. And some of them died, and some of them came super close. And there's one in particular that I think actually beat Amelia Earhart.
Beat her in the sense of
She was the first one over.
And what, someone had her snuffed? Like what?
Well, I think that they came remarkably close, and she was actually a pilot. And she's one of my ladies in the book, so I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
evidence that surfaced later on, 50 years later, that Quentin Wilson, who's this fantastic aviation expert in England, dug up in the New York Times archives, found a story that led him, he just started digging, and he started calculating the time and the tides, the currents and the wind, and he was like, oh my God, they were there. They were within sight of the coast.
Wow.
So it's a really remarkable story.
So, and you have unearthed all kinds of amazing photographs and video and all kinds of amazing things.
eBay.
Seriously?
Yeah. The thing about it is that you and I understand the newspaper business.
Yeah.
And now it is slowly being disintegrated.
Yeah.
And so this is the perfect time for me to write this book, because all of these newspapers, these grand standard newspapers, these titans of industry, are now liquidating all of their photo archives and putting everything on digital.
And it's going on eBay?
And it's going on eBay. They're getting sold to
Wow.
brokers. And so I was able to find some really remarkable things that actually helped me in my research, with names and pointing in directions of where
Right.
locations were and time frames and things like that I couldn't find anywhere else. So it really turned out to be an amazing tool.
Wow. Who knew? That's awesome.
I know.
Fantastic. Okay, so I want to hear a little bit more about these 3 ladies. Is it appropriate to maybe play the video now, or should we talk a little bit about the ladies and then play it?
Let me just give you a rundown of them first, so
Awesome.
then you'll know. So Ruth Elder was, she's going to be the first one you see, and she was the first one to take off, pardon me, in October of 1927. So she financed her flying lessons by entering beauty contests. As you'll see, she's a very, very pretty girl. And on the day that Lindbergh landed, they asked her what she was going to do with her money, her prize purse. And she says she's very excited and said, I'm going to be the first woman to fly over the Atlantic in my own plane. I'm going to pilot it. And it got in the newspaper with her picture, and these West Virginia businessmen came calling, looking for divestment, because Lindbergh had made so much money going over on his trip. It was just a waterfall of cash.
Wow.
So people were looking for other ways to kind of cash in on this, and the craze was flight. Everybody was into flight.
Yep.
So they bought her a plane. They asked her who she wanted for her co-pilot. She chose her flight instructor, George Haldeman. And George Haldeman is on there, you'll see. He was later on very instrumental in establishing the Civil Air Ministry, I believe, or Aeronautics Association, which went on to become the FAA. He was also instrumental in developing the B-1 bomber, and he was on the one and only flight of the Spruce Goose.
Oh.
So that's George, and they're both really amazing. They also, in the video, you're going to see them in rubber suits. They did not want to take a raft on board because it took up too much space. So Ruth one day was looking at this raft and saying, I've seen my mom make clothes, so I'll bet you anything I can make a survival suit out of that. So they cut it out, they pinched it together somehow, they filled it with wood chips. They both made these survival suits, which in the end really saved their lives.
Wow.
So that was great. So then our next one is Elsie McKay. She's the Honorable Elsie McKay, the daughter of an Earl. If anyone's familiar with Lady Mary of Downton Abbey, you've got almost a twin in Elsie McKay. She was very headstrong. She also volunteered her time in World War I as a VAD, which was a nurse, voluntary aid detachment. From there, they noticed her driving skills, and they thought that she was doing a really good job. She could drive very fast and very sharp. So they brought her over to Northolt, which was then just an Air Corps base. They didn't have the RAF at that point yet. This is 1914, 1916.
Right.
So she wasn't happy about being brought over, but it was her job to drive all the brass hats around and drive them quickly and safely. But at this Air Force base, she keeps seeing all of these planes taking off and landing. She talks a pilot, into taking her up, and then she's bitten. So she goes on to buying her own plane. She's one of the first women in England and Great Britain to get her pilot's license. She's one of the richest ones, so she could actually finance her flight herself. So as her pilot, she got Ray Hinchliffe, who was a tremendously well-known World War I ace. But in the video, you'll see that he has one eye. What had happened was he got shot down over Germany, and he was flying a Vickers plane which had twin machine guns. And on the impact of the crash, he flew in, the machine gun butt hit him in the face. It tore off this side of his face and left him without an eye, a bridge of his nose. They recreated back then, and you'll see how different he looks, his jaw and the right side of his body, and he lived. And he went on to become a pilot for Imperial Airways. However, the next year, they were going to impose health regulations in 1929 that meant that pilots had to have both eyes, so he was going to lose his job. So he needed to figure out a way that he was going to support his wife and 2 children. So when Elsie came to him and said, I'll pay you $25,000, and remember this is 1926, 27, 28.
Okay.
And I'll give you the Orteig Prize, which was established for people who are going both ways over the Atlantic. The first one over west to east got one, and then west to east was Charles Lindbergh, east to west was hopefully going to be Hinchliffe and Elsie. And that prize was $25,000, so it was a good amount of money. So he wanted to make that flight because of the monetary. He needed to provide for his family, but he was an excellent pilot. And then we have Charles Levine, who's a bit of a shyster. He was supposed to sell his plane to Lindbergh for his flight over the Spirit of St. Louis. They got into a contractual dispute, and Levine was pretty much Lindbergh's fiercest competitor. But because so many people had sued Levine, his plane was under lock and key in a hangar at Roosevelt Field. As he had got the injunction lifted, he was unlocking it. Lindbergh takes off and gets over the ocean, becomes this national hero. So Levine follows him, becomes the first transatlantic passenger, and then decides he's going to be the same one to go over from west to east. So he'll have made history going that way. And then comes MABEL BOLL, who's our aviatrix, who is not a pilot, but she's very good at marrying men who are about to die with pockets full of money.
With an oxygen tank, as I like to say.
Exactly. So she married an old man, the coffee king of Colombia, inherited all of his money, and she wanted to be known as more than the Queen of Diamonds. He gave her like $1 million on her wedding day to do whatever she wanted to. She bought a $26,000 gold sweater, which you'll see in the video, and necklaces and all kinds of stuff, diamonds, 62 karat, crazy stuff.
Mind-boggling in today's money.
Nuts. Harry Winston chopped that into 4 different diamonds when she finally died, and it was sold to him.
Wow.
So she seduced Levine, got him to agree to be the 3rd passenger on his plane, and she actually was, once they got, once they got back over stateside, there was some kerfuffles in between. She was the most direct competitor to Amelia Earhart. They both had the same weather reports, and in the end, they were 90 miles apart on Newfoundland. It came down to one piece of paper to decide on who is actually going to make it out there. So, and now that you know the background, now we can show the video.
We can play the
So,
video? Okay,
yeah.
let's do that.
So this is Ruth Elder, and who you're going to hear talking about her is her first cousin, Thomas McClellan, who knew her as a little girl and was very enamored with her. It's a very sweet story. And then also Jerry York, who is an Anniston, Alabama historian and has spent most of his retirement focusing on Ruth Elder and trying to bring her contributions to aviation and the women's movement back into the limelight. So you're going to hear from both of those two people. So. Ruth was also a silent film actress after her flying days. So these are stills from her movies.
I met her when I was about 7 years old. She had come to the house. She had driven from California in her nice little 34 Ford coupe. I have a picture of it with she and my dad. So, you know, in 1934, it wasn't just any woman who would drive a car from California to Alabama. It showed her kindness, her likability, and that's what I remember so much about her. But she was beautiful, drove a fancy car, she wore a mink coat, and all of our pictures shows her in a bright light.
Yes, I think she understood how scary it would be, and I think that's part of why she wanted to do it. She was an adventuresome young lady. In her earlier childhood, she was known as a daredevil. She played basketball, which was not all that common back in those days for a girl to play basketball. She even said that she wished she'd been born a boy so she could play football. So it was just an adventuresome spirit. She was a daredevil. She liked to take chances, and she liked to do fun stuff. And I think this was all just one big lark for her. I think she probably enjoyed every minute of it.
Oh, her courage and her ability to climb into an aircraft. In those days, you had to be either crazy or awful brave. You know, that when she did that, she was following other women and men who had gone before and never seen again. I mean, they're still out there in the Atlantic, you know, 75, 80 years later. So she had a lot of courage. You know what I say to her? I say, Ruthie, babe, jump on the back of this motorcycle with me, and we'll buzz out to the airport, and we'll take a flight in your old 1927 Travel Air. And she'd probably say, well, come along, boy, let's go.
She was fantastic. I guess that's the best word I can think of to describe her. I've already used the word adventuresome. Of course, she was very attractive. That goes without saying. She was very popular, and yet she was kind. You see pictures of her with children, and with the other flowers, she seems to fit in so well. And she was just a nice, likable person. And of course, she had a spirit that was just indomitable. She was just a very special lady.
Like a rainbow of love, flaming blue, within your plane up above, when you're sailing o'er the skies. The sun is eclipsed by the light in your eyes, flaming blue. You are a joy to behold, and you've set our brain all whirl. You're a sister to Lindy when up in the sky the American eagle taught you to fly, flaming blue. We're proud in telling the world that you are an American girl. On the heavens.
I certainly understood that he was early into aviation. I certainly understood that he had a long history about it. But truthfully, despite the fact that I talked to him for a number of years about it before he died, I didn't really understand the whole history of it until the internet came along and I started researching things about it. Because it added a lot more detail to what he had talked about. I knew that more than anything, my grandfather loved to fly. In fact, if I was going to sum up my understanding of his life, it would be he loved to fly. That was obvious. Every time I would talk to him, and really from the very earliest memories I have of him when I was long before I started school, flying was always on his mind, and no matter what the topic of conversation was, it would wind up there pretty quickly. And really until his very later years, that was still the case. So I understood that he was a devotee of powered flight. I understood that he had gotten into it when he was very young. I never really understood the celebrations that took place in France. I never knew there was a ticker tape parade in New York City. I never knew all those things until I looked into it later. He just didn't talk about that himself.
So this is Elsie McKay, who you're going to hear speaking about her is her biographer, Jane Baldwin, who actually lives just a couple miles away from Ballantrae Castle, Glenup Castle, where Elsie grew up. And she was a terrific help to me. Every time that I needed something, I'd be go, Jane, I need a picture of this, and she'd run out and get a picture of it. And she supplied me with a great deal of information that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Okay. So,
just she rode her horses very fast, and we think she drove her cars very fast. I think she was quite some go, and I think she just liked to do things that were exciting, and the next thing, at the time was flight, and it was what everybody wanted to do. And of course she was in the position of having the money to be able to do it, so I think she was drawn to that, and I think, flight then gave her a freedom that, riding a horse and riding a car didn't. So it must have been amazing for her to discover that. I think because she was so like her father, I mean, just from, little snippets that people said that knew them, and just when you see the things that she did, she had that extraordinary drive that he had that took him from being, a clerk in an office to being this, behemoth in industry. So she obviously shared that, but of course for women during that period, there weren't the opportunities, even for somebody of her class and money. But, it was so incredibly limited. I mean, had she been a boy, I have no doubt that, she would have followed him into P&R and been on the board and, like happened with all the kind of the male relatives.
So this is Ray Hinchliffe, and you'll see his pilot's license picture there before World War I and what he looked like, and then afterwards, once he was missing his the bridge of his nose and his eye. And those are only taken a couple of years apart.
I didn't know much about him. Nobody said anything to me about him. I think I said at boarding school on the 13th of March, my sister would come and tell me that it was the anniversary of his flight. And then coming home from school, I used to read stories in the bookcase. My mother was in pajamas for a long time after he didn't get back. Well, I think all of them were a bit brave who did those things. And I think they were positive that they could do it. Because of his trouble in one eye, I think he felt that they might not renew his pilot's license in the near future. And I think if he succeeded, he would have got that capital money, which I think was about £10,000 then, I'm not sure, which would have stood him in good stead to begin with if he'd lost his life. Over the years, I don't think that she thought he wouldn't do it. And I think she was relying a little bit on him doing it.
So this is our vivacious MABEL BOLL, our Queen of Diamonds, with her gold sweater right there. And who you're going to be hearing is her nephew, who's her only living relative, who actually threw that gold sweater away because he thought it was junk, because his kids had played with it. And so he said, well, I guess there's just a fortune in the Ohio landfill someplace.
Oh, wow.
So there's her ring. It's enormous. So she was quite a spitfire.
Well, she was very dynamic and pretty forceful, but in a nice way. I do remember a couple of times when she had arguments with my mother or other people in the family or people that worked at the hotel or the Savoy Plaza place where she lived, but for the most part, she was nice in a kind of a regal way. I think it was just she and I. And we were going to go to the Madison Square Garden to see the Ringling Brothers Circus, and I'm still a little runt, And I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and it's this big Cadillac convertible, and she's got this speaker thing. I don't know if it was under the hood or on the hood or something, and she saw somebody. I can't remember if the person was on the street or in a cab or exactly who it was she was honking at, but then she started talking on the loudspeaker for a little while, and of course the person turned, waved, this and that, and I don't remember if he or she responded with conversation or if it was just kind of a big surprise and Mabel was too far away, but you could certainly hear her, Oh, she had all this money and everything else, but she really knew how to get the last dollar out of everything, pretty much. I could see that she must have had a pretty strong temper because I saw her have a couple of arguments with servants and my mother that time and so on. And I could see that she didn't ever come to blows with in any of those arguments. But I mean, she was close, you know, on the edge. And I never, you know, she wasn't that big, but I never saw anybody really take her on because they were afraid of her.
So this is Charles Levine, who has no relatives to speak for him. So I will tell you, he made his first $1 million by collecting all the metal from World War I, the scrap metal, and selling it back to the government. So he was a little bit of a shyster. Here he is landing in Germany with Chamberlain to much fanfare. He became a hero for a short period of time. Could not really rival Lindbergh's presence, but he tried very, very, very hard. Here he is with Druin, who was his third pilot. He kept acquiring pilots and suing pilots. So there he is at two Fräuleins in Germany, in which his wife saw that picture. There she is right there, and she sailed over the Atlantic unannounced and found him, not with the Fräuleins, but with MABEL BOLL. And that kind of caused a little bit of friction in their marriage. They eventually divorced. But there's President Hindenburg, and that sad little Muppet with the cigarette flying out of his mouth. That was actually Wilmer Schultz, who was Levine's pilot one time, but then defected the morning of their flight to join the Earhart camp. And he was the guy who actually flew Amelia Earhart over. And now the movie is over.
That's awesome. So much amazing footage.
It's amazing what you can find. Yeah.
Internet
yeah.
is cool, isn't it?
The internet's great. Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, so when I'm trying to tell people, like, I'm going to be talking with Laurie, she's got this great new book, and I start talking about these women, the word that I keep using in the most positive of ways is that they were broads.
Oh, yeah.
I love that term. I hope someday later when I'm, old and gray, somebody calls me a broad.
I'll call you a broad right now.
Thank you. But that's how I feel like these women were. I mean, these women were just saying, I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to make it happen.
Right, right. No matter what. And each of them made tremendous sacrifices in order to get where they did in their quest for aviation and trying to get across.
What was the thing that surprised you the most in doing your research about these women?
The thing that surprised me the most was the time period in which they were in, how much opposition they faced, even from Eleanor Roosevelt, who told Ruth that she should just stay home and be a typist, and that would better suit her than trying to cross the Atlantic and commit suicide. And that was the Eleanor Roosevelt of 1927. That's not the Eleanor Roosevelt of World War II that we know. But that was very, very typical of people who believed that Ruth and Elsie and Mabel were doing this for publicity stunts. The thing that also surprised me is that they were on the front pages of the New York Times, London Times, you name it. There's the Jonestown News in there. They were on the front pages of these newspapers every single day. And once Earhart made her flight over, they vanished into history, never to be seen again until now.
Because people were only interested in the very first.
I guess to the victor goes the spoils.
Right.
I think it also had a lot to do with the fact that Amelia Earhart was so visible. And then even, people don't really know who Beryl Markham is. People don't really know who Amy Johnson is. And they were also women who made really great advances for women in aviation. But Amelia Earhart, for some reason, possibly because she vanished, maybe that just grew her legend. But I think the combination of the Wall Street crash, women kind of stopped pursuing their dreams. Amelia went on and kept doing things because she had the money and the ability to do so. But these others they didn't. So that could possibly be a reason why they've just kind of faded.
So I think a lot about the parallels between their time and now we have
Absolutely.
a female running for president. Talk to me about the parallels that you see. I'm sure you've thought about it, about the time that we're in now and what we're seeing in the world. comparatively?
I see that we haven't really come as far as we wanted to be, I think, with, and we've all heard it, that Hillary Clinton gets criticized for her hair, for her clothing, for her demeanor, for being too tough, for being too soft, for being a liar, for being all those things. And those are pretty much the same things that these women faced 90 years ago. We really haven't come that far. And I think hopefully we should have, because she is running for president and she's, she's on the top of the ticket. So I would have hoped that we would have a little bit more acceptance and broader minds that we do. And maybe if she makes it as president, that will happen. I'm not sure we've seen that kind of thing happen with Obama,
Right.
which is disappointing.
Right.
But we're taking steps, and the more steps we take, the farther we get to the point that I think we need to be.
Fair enough. So this is a bit of a departure for you, historical fiction.
Yeah.
So it's not history. It's not a biography of these women. It is
No.
historical fiction. So how did you approach that process of blending real life women and their stories, and then, I don't know if we want to say embellishments, how do you describe what the spaces you fill in?
It was actually very easy to tell their stories, because once I started digging, particularly in the Australian archive, newspaper archive, which sounds crazy, but that country has kept everything. So I had interviews from almost all of them. I was able to determine their tone, their personalities, how their speech patterns, what they would say, how they would act, what they would wear. So it really was not that difficult. I really had a very good sense of who these women were. And that's why I decided to do not a biography and not a history book, but I wanted to put the reader in their shoes. I wanted the reader to feel what they were going to, what their motivations were, how determined they were, and how important it was for them to accomplish this. And I didn't feel that I could do that doing a nonfiction book. So to be honest, there are some fabrications in this book. It's not that many. I needed to have some connective tissue in order for stories to link. But all in all, I'd say about 95% of this book is true. It's substantiated.
So there was just an amazing amount of information for you to
Absolutely.
even cull
Once
from.
I started finding it,
I
it
love
didn't
that.
stop. And it was because the internet grows every day, and more stuff is put online every day.
Right.
And I had access to a university library because my husband is a professor at U of O.
Oh,
So
see?
that really helped a lot.
That's fantastic. So let's just talk about you as an author. So we're here at Google. You have a really strong social media presence, Twitter, Facebook. You have like 4,000 some followers on Twitter and a couple thousand on Facebook. What does that community mean to you as an author in general?
It means a couple of really great things. It means that in any city that I go to, I can put on Facebook and say, who wants to have dinner with me tonight? And I have a dinner companion.
And you have a date, yeah.
So I like to do that. I like to do that in every city. I like to send out a bat signal and say, hey, you guys, we've been friends on Facebook for years and years and years. Let's get together and meet. And then those girls get together and meet, and then they become friends, and the community gets stronger. And it's this particular type of reader that I have that I think that they're very smart women, they're educated women, they have a very good sense of self. And so when they meet one another, it's almost an instant blend.
Right.
It works out beautifully.
Because they have a common bond, obviously. They love your work.
So and we have the common senses of humor, which is very, very important when choosing friends.
Very much.
So I think that really helps quite a bit. And that's my favorite part of going on tour, is meeting people and hanging out with them and getting to know them, people that I've talked with for 10 years online, and finally I get to meet them in person.
That's so
awesome.
fun. So let's talk a little bit about what's next. So I know you don't just sit around going, oh, well, I think I might do something. Like, you've always got something in the hopper. So what are you working on these days?
I'm going back to historical fiction.
Okay.
Only because when this book was done, it was finished in 2014, so I wrote Housebroken in between those. So it's not like I'm doing
relatively new books out right now.
out this year.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
A little busy.
Right. So, but I found a story that is a Phoenix legend, and you might know about it. I'm not going to talk about it yet because I don't want anybody to jump on the stuff that I have.
Okay.
But it's fascinating. It involves a murder, and I've finished the first 7 chapters. We're getting ready to sell it out to publishers this next week. So we'll see what happens.
I can't wait to see it.
It's a fun story.
Awesome.
Grisly, but it's fun.
Grizzly.
It's very grisly.
Oh, only a writer uses a word like grizzly. Laurie, it's been my personal delight to have you here. Thank you so
Britton,
much
thank you.
for joining us. Best of luck with everything. I'm so excited to finish reading the book. It's been, like I said,
Hey.
reading about broads, it doesn't get any better than that.
Wait, you're a good broad.
Thank
You're
you
my
very
kind of
much.
broad.
You are my kind
so
of broad.
there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.